I told my boyfriend that I don't want his brother to live with us. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 3 years and living together for 2. He has an older brother who lives with a friend. He's been living with his friend for about 5 years without paying rent. His friend is getting more serious about his relationship and has given my boyfriend's brother a year to find a new place to stay. His brother is kind of an idiot, and he and I don't get along very well, but I tolerate him because he's my boyfriend's brother. He lacks motivation and currently doesn't earn enough money to live on his own, and he says he has no savings. His girlfriend also lives with him and doesn't work, so they're basically a package deal. I've mentioned to my boyfriend before that I really don't want his brother moving in with us if he doesn't find a place by December. We don't have space. Our guest room is right next to the main living area, and we only have one bathroom. They also don't have parents, so staying with them isn't an option. My boyfriend says he won't let his brother end up on the street and that if he stays with us, it would only be for 3 months. But I know it would be longer. If he can't find a place in a year, what difference will 3 more months make? It would be one thing if I got along with his brother, but he constantly makes rude comments and relies on others to take care of him. My boyfriend and I just had an explosive fight over this, ending with him basically telling me that I have no say in this decision and that, if it comes to it, his brother will live with us. I've approached this kindly and tried to explain how uncomfortable I would feel. Not to mention, his brother works night shifts and sleeps all day, which means it'd feel like I have to stay quiet in my own home. I don't think I'm being unreasonable by expressing my stance on this. I also don't want his brother to be homeless, but I don't want him living here. After the argument, things became tense between my boyfriend and me. We didn't speak for hours, each retreating to our own space. I was trying to calm down and figure out how to approach the situation more effectively, but I couldn't help feeling frustrated and betrayed. I felt like my opinion didn't matter, that my home, the place where I should feel comfortable and safe, was being invaded by a unilateral decision. When we finally sat down to talk, I tried to make him understand my perspective. I asked him if he truly believed that 3 months would be enough for his brother to become independent, considering his lack of savings and job stability. I also reminded him how much effort we had put into building our home and how important it was for me to keep our space as a place of peace. But his response was the same. He's my brother. I'm not going to let him be homeless. I realized there was no way to change his mind. This had become a breaking point in our relationship, something we couldn't just ignore or move past. I felt trapped between 2 equally painful choices: accepting a forced cohabitation with someone who made me deeply uncomfortable, or facing the possibility of our relationship deteriorating beyond repair. To try to find a middle ground, I suggested helping his brother in another way, maybe by financially supporting him to rent a small room or actively helping him find a place to stay. But my boyfriend rejected all my suggestions, insisting that the best option was for him to move in with us temporarily. Days passed and the tension at home only grew. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was always about his brother. I was emotionally drained, trying to make my boyfriend understand my concerns without making it seem like I was rejecting his family. But he didn't see it that way. To him, I was just being selfish and unsympathetic. One night, after another heated argument, I decided to take some time to think. I went to a friend's house and spent the night there, trying to analyze the situation with a clearer mind. I told her everything, and her reaction was immediate. If your opinion doesn't matter in this decision, how much will it matter in the future? Her words echoed in my mind and made me realize that this wasn't just a living arrangement issue. It was about respect and consideration in our relationship. I went back home with a different mindset. I was no longer going to beg for understanding or try to convince my boyfriend with logical arguments. This time, I told him clearly that if his brother moved in, I couldn't continue living there. It wasn't a threat, it was a necessity. I needed a home where I felt heard and respected. My boyfriend's reaction was a mix of surprise and anger. He didn't expect me to set such a firm boundary. He accused me of overreacting and not understanding his situation, but I stood my ground. This isn't about not helping your brother, I told him. It's about you also helping me feel safe in our home. I didn't know how this was going to end, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring my own feelings. Something had to change, and fast. The tension at home had become unbearable. Every interaction between my boyfriend and me was weighed down by an invisible burden of resentment and frustration. There wasn't a single day when I didn't feel that pressure in my chest. that fear that this situation would end up breaking what we had built together. Even so, I tried to stand firm in my decision. I knew that giving in would mean ignoring my own needs, my own boundaries. One afternoon, while folding clothes in the bedroom, my boyfriend walked in with a serious expression. Without preamble, he said, "I talked to my brother. I told him he has until December to find another place, and if he hasn't by then, I'll help him financially, but he can't stay here." I stayed silent for a moment. I didn't expect him to take that step without me having to insist any further. I knew how hard it was for him to set boundaries with his brother, and the fact that he had done it without me demanding it made me feel somewhat relieved. But I also knew this didn't mean the problem was solved. "And what did he say?" I asked cautiously. "That it's not fair, that he has nowhere to go, that it's my responsibility to help him because we're brothers." I sighed. I wasn't surprised. His brother had always relied on others to get by. He always found a way to make people feel guilty for not carrying his weight. And my boyfriend, with his noble heart and strong sense of loyalty, wasn't immune to that emotional manipulation. "And what do you think?" I asked gently. "I think this shouldn't be destroying our relationship," he said with a sigh. "But I can't help feeling like I'm abandoning him. And at the same time, I know you're right. It wouldn't just be for 3 months. He wouldn't change in that time. And I also understand that this is our home, not just mine." I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like he was really listening to me, that he understood what I had been trying to tell him from the beginning. But there was still a shadow in his expression, a lingering doubt he couldn't completely shake. "I don't want this to tear us apart," I whispered, moving closer to him. "But I also don't want to feel like my feelings don't matter, like my discomfort isn't relevant." "It is," he murmured. "It's not fair that I've made you feel this way." We held each other in silence for a long moment. I didn't know if this meant everything would be okay, but at least it was a step forward. However, the situation with his brother quickly took a turn for the worse. A week later, while my boyfriend was at work, I received an unexpected message from his brother. A simple, "We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment before responding. I really didn't feel like dealing with him, but I also didn't want things to escalate behind my boyfriend's back. We agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. When I arrived, he was already there, wearing his usual carefree attitude, but with an expression that betrayed a hint of anger. I sat across from him, not really in the mood to drag this conversation out any longer than necessary. "So, you brainwashed my brother," he said bluntly. I frowned. "That's not true, and you know it. What I know is that I never had any issues with you until now. And suddenly, he's willing to leave me out on the street." I took a deep breath. "This isn't about leaving you on the street. It's about setting boundaries. Something any adult should understand. Easy for you to say when you're not the one in this situation." I laughed, unable to help myself. "Seriously? You've been living rent-free for 5 years. You've had plenty of time to prepare. It's not like this came out of nowhere." His expression hardened. "You're cold, you know that?" "I'm realistic," I replied. "I don't want you to be homeless, but I also don't want you invading my space. And honestly, I don't understand why you think it's our responsibility to fix your life for you." He looked at me for a moment as if he wanted to argue, but then he just shook his head and stood up. "I don't care what you say. My brother will never turn his back on me." And with that, he left without another word. I sat there, staring at his half-finished cup of coffee, with a strange feeling in my chest. I knew this wasn't over. I knew the worst was yet to come. The conversation with my boyfriend's brother left me with a bitter feeling. I knew it wasn't over, that he would find a way to pressure my boyfriend into changing his mind. And I wasn't wrong. That same night, my boyfriend came home from work with a somber expression. As soon as he closed the door, he collapsed onto the couch, running both hands over his face in obvious frustration. "I talked to my brother," he murmured without looking at me. I crossed my arms, waiting. I knew this was going to happen. "He said you were cruel to him, that you made him feel like he was worthless." I sighed. "Do you really believe that?" "I don't know," he said with a sigh. "I'm tired. I feel like I'm caught in the middle of all this, like I have to choose between the two of you." "You don't have to choose," I responded calmly. "You just have to set a boundary. Helping your brother doesn't mean giving up our home." My boyfriend rubbed his temples and remained silent for a moment. "I'm worried about what he might do. He has no one else. And what about us? What about our space? Our relationship?" His gaze darkened, as if my question hit him harder than he expected. "I don't want this to destroy us," he murmured. "Then don't let it." But the situation only escalated. The following week, we had an unexpected visitor. It was his brother, with a defiant expression on his face. My heart pounded the moment I saw his stance, the way he fixed his eyes on me. "I'll be direct," he said bluntly. "I have nowhere to go, and my brother would never turn his back on me. I'm staying here whether you like it or not." I felt a wave of anger rush through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This is not your home," I replied firmly, "and you don't get to decide that on your own." He looked at my boyfriend, expecting support, but my boyfriend said nothing. "Brother, please," he finally said. "I'll help you find a place, but you can't stay here." His brother's face hardened. "It's her, isn't it? This is her fault." "No, it's our decision," my boyfriend corrected, though his voice wavered slightly. But his brother wasn't listening. "You're choosing a woman over your own blood. Unbelievable." A tense silence filled the room. My boyfriend looked trapped between loyalty to his brother and his desire to keep the peace in our relationship. I, on the other hand, knew there was a line I wasn't going to let be crossed. "I think this conversation is over," I finally said. His brother shot us a hateful look before turning and storming out of our apartment, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the air was thick. My boyfriend sank into the couch, running a hand over his face, clearly shaken. "He can't stand it," he murmured. "He's not going to forgive me." I sat beside him and took his hand. "He's going to need time, but he also needs to learn how to stand on his own. I just hope he doesn't hate me forever. If he does, it's not your fault, or mine, or anyone's." My boyfriend slowly nodded, but the weight of the situation still lingered. I knew this wasn't over. His brother wasn't someone who simply accepted no as an answer. The following days were a whirlwind of contained tension. My boyfriend and I barely talked about anything other than his brother. The atmosphere at home had become thick, almost suffocating. I knew he was struggling internally, trying to balance his sense of family loyalty with our relationship. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when my boyfriend walked in, phone in hand, his expression filled with anguish. "It's my brother," he said, exhaling heavily. "He says that if we don't help him, he doesn't know what he's going to do, that he could end up on the street at any moment." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I knew this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "And what did you say?" "Nothing yet," he admitted. "I don't know what to do." The guilt in his voice was palpable, and I felt a pang of sadness for him. But I also knew we couldn't keep giving in to his brother's manipulations. "We can look for options," I suggested. "Shelters, assistance programs. There are ways to help him without him moving in here." "You don't understand," he said, looking up at me with frustration. "He's my brother. I can't leave him alone." "This isn't about leaving him alone. It's about not letting this situation destroy what we have." My boyfriend didn't respond right away. Finally, he let out a long sigh and sat down on the couch. I knew he was processing everything that had happened, but I could also see the internal struggle in his expression. The next morning, his brother showed up unannounced. He didn't call, didn't text. He just knocked on the door as if nothing had happened. When I opened it, I found him with a defeated look on his face and a couple of backpacks at his feet. "I have nowhere to go," he said bluntly. "If you turn me away, I don't know what I'm going to do." My heart pounded. I knew he was trying to provoke pity, hoping my boyfriend would soften and give in. I took a deep breath and stayed calm. "We're going to find a solution," I replied, "but you can't stay here." "I can't believe this," he muttered. "My own brother is turning his back on me." "It's not turning his back on you. It's helping you the right way." At that moment, my boyfriend appeared, taking in the scene with a conflicted expression. His brother looked at him intently, waiting for his support. "Tell me I can stay, please," he begged. The silence in the room was unbearable. I watched my boyfriend, knowing this was the defining moment. Finally, after what felt like hours, my boyfriend exhaled and answered, "I'll help you find a place, but you can't stay here." His brother looked at him in disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend what he was hearing. Then his expression twisted into an angry scowl. "I see how it is," he spat. "She's changed you. You're not the same anymore." He turned around and left without another word. My boyfriend sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "This is going to be harder than I thought." I stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," I told him. "Now we just have to move forward." He nodded, but something told me his brother wouldn't give up that easily. My boyfriend's brother's absence brought momentary relief, but it also left a lingering sense of uncertainty. I knew this wouldn't be the last time he tried to contact us, nor the last time my boyfriend would feel guilty. Over the next few days, the tension at home began to ease, though my boyfriend remained distracted, his gaze fixed on his phone more than usual. I didn't need to ask to know he was waiting for a message from his brother. I knew he felt torn, but I also knew the only thing I could do was be there for him without pressuring him. One afternoon, as I was making coffee, my boyfriend received a call. I saw his expression change when he saw the name on the screen. He answered in a low voice and stepped out onto the balcony to speak in private. I couldn't help the knot that formed in my stomach. I knew his brother was insisting again. When he returned, his expression was a mix of anger and worry. He collapsed onto the couch, running both hands over his face. "He said he has nowhere to sleep," he murmured, "that he's in a cheap motel, but he only has a few days left before he runs out of money." I sighed, trying to contain my frustration. "And what do you want to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't want him to go through this, but I also don't want to ruin what we have." I sat beside him and took his hand. "We can help him in another way. Pay for a room for a month while he looks for a job. Help him get organized. But bringing him here isn't the solution." He nodded, but I could still see the guilt on his face. I knew it was hard for him to stay firm, but I also knew his brother wouldn't change if he kept relying on him. The next day, my boyfriend transferred some money to his brother and sent him a message explaining that it was all he could do. There was no immediate response, but when it finally came, it was a simple thanks. I thought that meant things would be calm, at least for now. I was wrong. 2 nights later, at 3 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I woke up with a start and looked at my boyfriend, who also opened his eyes instantly. We stared at each other in silence for a moment before he quickly got up to see who it was. I already knew the answer before he even opened the door. It was his brother. He looked disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his face filled with desperation. My body tensed as I watched him step inside without waiting for an invitation. "I had nowhere else to go," he said bluntly, looking at my boyfriend. "I need to stay here at least for one night." I saw my boyfriend struggle with himself. I knew he wanted to say no, that he understood the consequences. But I also knew how hard it was to turn away someone standing right in front of you, begging for help. "Just for tonight," he finally said. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew that one night could easily turn into something much longer. Without a word, I walked to the bedroom and shut the door behind me. But as soon as I did, frustration hit me like a wave. I knew I couldn't be angry at my boyfriend for wanting to help his brother, but I also didn't want to live with the uncertainty of whether this would turn into something permanent. The hours passed slowly. I barely slept, listening to every sound from the living room, wondering if we would ever break free from this cycle. When I woke up, the tension was still there, and the worst part was knowing this wasn't over yet. The sun had just begun filtering through the curtains when I opened my eyes. The feeling of anxiety was still there, like a heavy shadow pressing against my chest. I got up silently, careful not to wake my boyfriend, and headed to the kitchen. I needed a moment to think, to organize my thoughts before facing whatever came next. I knew this situation couldn't go on. We couldn't stay trapped in this cycle of manipulation and guilt. And most importantly, I couldn't keep feeling like a stranger in my own home. A little while later, my boyfriend walked out of the bedroom with a tired expression. He looked at me in silence before pouring himself a cup of coffee and sitting across from me. "I talked to my brother this morning," he finally said. "I told him he has to leave today." I looked up, surprised. "How did he react?" My boyfriend sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "He got angry as expected. He told me I'm a traitor, that I'm abandoning him when he needs me the most. But I think deep down he knows this couldn't go on any longer." I nodded slowly. I didn't want my boyfriend to feel like he had made a selfish decision, but I also needed him to understand that this was the only way forward. A few hours later, his brother started packing his things. He did it silently, his face hardened, his movements tense. I didn't try to talk to him. I knew any attempt at an explanation would be pointless. Before leaving, he stopped at the door and looked at my boyfriend. "I didn't expect this from you," he said coldly. "I guess what she wants is all that matters now." My boyfriend closed his eyes for a moment as if his words stung. Then he opened them and spoke firmly. It's not just about what she wants. It's about what we need as a couple. I couldn't keep letting this situation destroy us. His brother scoffed and walked out without another word. I closed my eyes as I heard the door shut. Finally, it was over. That night was strangely quiet. Without his brother's constant presence, the house felt different, as if we had reclaimed a space that had stopped feeling like ours. My boyfriend was thoughtful, but I could sense a shift in him. A part of the guilt that had been consuming him seemed to slowly fade. We sat together on the couch holding hands. There wasn't much that needed to be said. We both knew we had been through a difficult test, but we also knew we had made the right choice. "Thank you for standing by me through this," my boyfriend murmured, squeezing my hand gently. I smiled and rested my head on his shoulder. "Always." The storm had passed. Not without scars, not without wounds, but with the certainty that we had found a way forward together.